Good morning. Welcome back, Concordia University Irvine students. HLMG 425 financial management of health services organizations. Oh, wait a minute here. I think there's some technical difficulty. It says that we're in week 5. I'm just kidding. There's no technical difficulty. Congratulations. Technically, you're past the halfway point now. And so for these first 4 weeks, we've done a lot of skill building to build you up to where you need to be to finish out these last several weeks of the course. Now, obviously, that assumes that you have been grappling with the content in the first 4 weeks. You don't have to master it, right? This is just a bachelor's program, but you do have to grapple with it in order to understand key building blocks and key pieces to the foundation that we're going to talk about starting in week 5 and specifically with with chapter 13, strategic and operational planning. And we've really been talking about the entire course, how there's an overlap between the main subject of our course, which is financial management, but also there's an overlap with accounting. There's an overlap with economics. There's an overlap with corporate strategy. And so all of those together make up this idea of strategic planning. And strategic planning looks different in many organizations. You know, when I first started in healthcare way back in 2007, I worked for a company called Healthcare Partners. And what Healthcare Partners did is we had a 3-year strategic plan. So there was a 3-year window, but every year that strategic plan would get updated. And literally, you could set your clock by the time we reached mid-November. Everyone was gearing up. All of the departments and the divisions were gearing up to create their budgets in order to go through the approval process. And back then, our fiscal year started in February. And so, you know, again, it looks different in different organizations, but the process is really looking forward into the future, doing financial projections and forecasting on how you think your division or your department, or of course, as you climb up the corporate ladder into the C-suite, then you're looking at the overall business and operation strategic planning. So when we start on chapter 13 here on page 295 and beyond, we're going to start to define and understand the importance of planning, some prerequisites for the planning process. There are different types of planning, just like there are different types of budgets that we've talked about. You're going to compare and contrast operational and strategic planning. We're going to list some best practice steps and discuss some of the methods that are used to evaluate the process. And so the most important thing you want to understand about strategic planning is ideally it involves the entire organization, right? Because the managers that are on the ground, you can call them line managers, functional managers, tactical managers, known by many different names, but those are the people that are closest to the action, that can do the forecasting on volume and do the forecasting on cost, direct costs, indirect costs. All those are projections and forecasts looking into the next fiscal year or the next several fiscal years. In some organizations, a strategic plan is good for 10 years and it's reviewed every 3 years or every couple of years just to make sure that it's calibrated and in line with the economic realities of the country, if you will. And strategic planning or operational planning, it just isn't for the organization. You can have strategic planning for special projects, such as maybe you want to implement or upgrade a health information system. Maybe you want to build a brand new wing or brand new tower for your hospital. Maybe you want to refashion or repurpose an existing space within your health services organization to meet an existing or growing need within your community or population of patients. So strategic planning exists on many different levels. But what it talks about there, and I think it's really good here on the bottom of page 297 under management approach, it says it's a bottom-up planning where subordinates develop the plan and then submit it to senior manager for approval. Now, there's a running joke sometimes within organizations, especially in the military, but we also experience it at healthcare partners, and that would be managers would tend to ask for more than what they want, maybe even double to what they want, because they understand that the C-suite, and when we say C-suite, that's chief executive officer, chief financial officer, chief operation officer, chief medical information officer, chief nursing officer. They tend to only approve a fraction of what it is that you're requesting, maybe even half. So if your budget for your division is $2 million. Well, the running joke is, if you will, is that you're only going to get approved for $1 million. So if you need $1 million, ask for $2 million. I don't know how scientifically sound that process is anymore. And that's because there's accountability built in on the back end. Let me give you an example here. Let's say if you had a part of your budget planning was $100,000 in, either in expenditures or profits or costs, you kind of fill in the blank, right? Well, let's say if you only hit 750,000. So there's a big gap there. If there's a gap under your forecasted number, you're going to have to report that and explain that to your superiors. And certainly if you go over budget, good or bad, you have to explain it to your superiors. So doesn't really matter per se in this example, doesn't really matter what you're measuring. Doesn't really matter if you go under or over, because the process is that if you miss the mark by a large percentage, and usually that's about 10% on either side of your forecast, then you have some quote unquote explaining to do. And that has really stopped the process of managers inflating their planning and inflating their forecasting, if you will. So as we continue on in this chapter, we've talked a little bit about incremental and zero-based budgeting, and that goes hand in hand with cost-based planning, zero-based budgeting, fixed budgets versus flexible budgets. Some of that you're starting to understand in the first couple chapters. And really, it's the process of if you're running your business, are you going to start your budget at zero? Or are you going to base your budget based on previous performance, even though we know that previous performance doesn't guarantee future performance, but it is just a process that you use to create the planning process. Um, and, it has to be tweaked and it has to be calibrated, but it has to be transparent. And so when we start to talk about corporate planning on 298 and 299, pages 298 and 299 and beyond, we're really just talking about a process that is transparent. The components of the process are modular and they have to be thoughtful, but there is no set formula on how you would do a strategic plan or what are the foundational pieces that you would use for your strategic planning process outside of what are the whatever the norms and the requirements are for your organization. So I hope that was clear. Let's take a look at Exhibit 13.1 in your book, and it has a kind of four-step process of the major stages of planning. So you've got strategic planning, operational planning, budgeting, and capital budgeting. And again, when we talk about capital budgeting, that's going to be different in organizations. In some organizations, capital budgeting is anything over $10,000. In larger organizations, it may be a lot larger than that. When I worked for a genetics lab, Sequenom Center for Molecular Medicine in La Jolla, California, as a manager, I had the authority to sign off on anything 25 up to $25,000. Anything between $25,000 and $100,000, then my boss had to sign off. So it required two signatures. And so anything over $100,000 would be part of the capital expenditures. And then that would require a C-suite, if not a C-suite, certainly a VP level sign off. So strategic planning, it really forces managers to anticipate where they want their resources spent in the health organizations over a 3 to 10 year process. Again, that's going to depend on your organization. So they identify the resources necessary in order to get the division or the department where it needs to be, and in turn, catapulting the organization where it needs to be. So it provides the starting point for operational and the budgeting process. So there's a 13-step process that starts to be identified in Exhibit 13.1, and not all organizations follow each step of this process. Again, the window for strategic planning will be different within organizations. A nice number, though, is 10 years, but you can't go 10 years without calibrating and updating your strategic plan in order to match the economic factors on the ground or within the economy. And so every 3 years or every year, that process needs to be reviewed. But as you can see, it requires planning at both the strategic and the operational levels. And then it requires the synergizing of budgets, and these can be fixed budgets, these can be flex budgets, and these budgets are projections, and they forecast revenues and expenses that are necessary in order for the division to conduct business over that specific business cycle. So what are the steps involved in that? Starting on page 301. Sometimes when we look at the mission and vision of the company, it's so easy to overlook that, right? When we start with companies, Part of that onboarding process is to understand the mission and the vision of the company, but then we just kind of forget about them. But the strategic planning process is an opportunity to re-engage with the mission and the vision of the company. And who knows, over that time of strategic planning, that may require a revision of the mission and vision of the company if we truly want to get it right. And so I'm saying all of that to say these are living documents that managers can use as a philosophical foundation for their forecasting, for their strategic planning, if you will. Number two is huge. Assess the external environment, right? No business is in a bubble. No health services organization is in a bubble. Uh, Outside factors, the factors in the economy, the factors in the quote unquote external environment, they put external pressure on the organization. And these factors are often political, right? Because they are established by our political leaders at both the local, state, and federal levels. And they often involve funding or the distribution of funding or the reimbursement of funding. Or the requirements involved with funding, if you will. And so that causes the organization to have to shift, create policies and procedures to match the external requirements. A perfect example right now, I'm the EHR director for a company called Vascular Access Centers. And so part of the strategic planning that we've done and that I've done coming into this new year here is to understand what are the external requirements for the MIPS and the MARS program. And these are, for those of you that are unfamiliar, these government programs that they mandate on health services organizations, and specifically on, in my part, on the technology, on the EMR technology. And so we've got requirements to exchange clinical information with health information exchanges, to be able to access prescription drug monitoring data, and to, do all of these other things, e-prescribe and send patients their information electronically. And so these are external realities that put pressure within your organization that will show up in the strategic planning process. So if it's going to cost $200 per provider per month to get them access to the prescription drug monitoring program, that's part of the financial commitments that the organization has to make within the next quarter or within the next year in order to meet those external requirements. That last bullet point there at the top of page 302, implementation of the Affordable Care Act or any other type of government funded legislation would be part of that process. And it isn't just in real time, even before the ACA or the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act or any of these major legislation that has to do with healthcare, there's usually a 2 to 3 year build-up process where this legislation is working its way through Congress. And so managers have to be aware of that. They have to be aware of what type of legislation or what type of external factors could be working its way through the approval process that may affect your business a year down the line, or maybe even 2 or 3 years down the line. Remember that strategic planning can be anywhere from 3 years to 10 years. And so managers have to do their due diligence there to be aware of that. Now, step number three, assessing the internal environment as well. Very important. As much as we trust executives and trust people running our business, they aren't necessarily always as scrupulous as we need them to be. And so there may be internal factors on the ground that could affect things, such as overbilling, upcoding, or doing other types of questionable practices that ultimately could affect your status as a Medicare or Medicare provider, could affect the financial conditions of your health services organization if you are found to have done some unscrupulous things. Then you could have to pay that money back, or maybe you're losing a key member of your management team or of your tactical team that takes away that tacit knowledge. These are all internal factors here. Maybe you've got some cash flow issues because your payer mix needs to be readjusted or something along those lines. You can use things like SWOT analysis, strength, weaknesses, opportunity, and threats to kind of assess both internal and external realities for that matter. So once you do all of that, you begin to kind of get a vision there that we're talking about in steps 4, 5, and 6. And as that vision for your forecast year or quarter begins to come into vision, then there are some critical factors that you have to consider in step number 6, such as your patient share. We talked a little bit about payer mix earlier, your ability to have staff that can meet the needs, your ability to manage cost, for example, and then your ability to synergize resources or use resources within an efficient way within your organization. And so then finally there, Exhibit 13.2, I think has a really good example there of what that finish process begins to look like. So your mission, your vision, your strategic initiatives there, the critical factors that affect that will lead to some objectives, if you will. And then in earnest, you can start to develop that financial plan that we talk about on page 306 in steps 7 and beyond. Operational planning and strategic planning, they really go hand in hand. It's really the opposite side of the same coin, if you will. The strategic plan is the idea of the thing, the intellectual capacity of the thing, whereas the operational planning are what really happens on the ground or what you believe will happen on the ground. So it's the process of translating the financial plan into a year-by-year objectives. It's the process of expressing the operational plan in monetary terms in units, and so then it looks like the strategic planning. You asked for $2 million, you were granted $150 million, and so now in the operational planning, you start to take that $1.5 million, and you start to allocate that. Your largest cost will always be employees in most cases. And so probably about 20% if not higher, of that $1.5 million is going to go towards employees. And then you've got equipment and all these other factors that you have to consider there when we're doing the operational planning process. I think that's enough good stuff here. So just to kind of recap here, and I'm on page 310 right now. Planning is the process of deciding in advance what must be done in the future. It can be classified in several ways. It actually consists of four major stages, such as strategic planning, operational planning, budgeting, and capital budgeting. It looks anywhere from 3 to 10 years in the future and consists of several steps. The value of strategic planning lies in a systematic approach to dealing with uncertain futures. I think another good part of it, too, is it re-engages the organization back with the mission and vision, and it kind of synthesizes that all together. Operational planning is the process of translating that strategic plan into tangible core objectives. And then the governing body, also known as the C-suite, also known as the board of directors, are responsible for evaluating the progress of the strategic plan. And again, that's usually done in certain windows there. So if you've got that 10-year plan, maybe every 3 years, you look to address that plan, or with healthcare partners, for in our example, we had a 10-year plan with a 3-year window, and every year that 3-year window was calibrated and updated to match the realities of the ground, on the ground. Whew, wow. Welcome to the world of strategic planning and financial planning. I don't want to scare any of you off. Hopefully, a lot of these concepts made sense to you. And if you haven't mastered them yet, that's fine. But it's very important that you keep grappling with the content. I promise you, I don't expect any of you to be master level financial managers at the end of this 7-week course. I'm just looking that you have grappled with the concepts, grappled with the idea, and that you're walking away with some tangible pieces and tangible building blocks that you can then take into your master's program, and that you can then, and even before then, you can start changing the realities of the facts on the ground right now for those of you that are already working in the healthcare space. Okay, that's it. This is week 5, so we do have a live session, and I look forward to connecting with you then. And of course, I always look forward to reading your hard work. Thank you. God bless, and we'll see you on the virtual session.